Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover the GAP Burp extension. This extension has evolved over time and it's actually the first thing I wrote in Python. I just started looking at other open source extensions and trying to understand and modify them and kind of went from there really. I started with the idea of getting all parameters and burp traffic, so I wrote a very basic looking get all params extension to practice using some Python. And this eventually expanded to trying to get links to try those parameters on. So I changed the name from get all params to GAP to be a bit more generic. For finding links, I started off with Link Finder by Gerben Javado, that a complex regex for finding those links. But I wanted to improve on that. The function was actually part of the XN Link Finder tool initially, and then I just moved the same functionality into GAP. Version 2 of GAP then added word mode to build a target-specific word list for fuzzing. This required some non-standard modules such as beautiful soup, so that complicated the setup slightly. So talking about setup, let's dive in and start off with installing GAP. So first you need to go to my GitHub page and go to GAP Burp extension. The link for this will be in the notes. We're going to be using the latest version, which is 3.4. I actually only updated it yesterday just to fix a few minor bugs that I found while trying to make this video. Just to note, the help for this extension is actually here. It's on a separate link, just because this document is actually displayed from help menu inside the extension itself as well. A lot of people come to this page, see the .py file, think, oh, that's what I need, grab that, throw it into Burp, and then wonder why they get some error messages. And that's because it wasn't installed properly following these instructions here. If you just do that, it will still work, but word mode will be disabled because you haven't imported the requirements that needs. So first, to install it, first you need to go to the Jython site and you need to download the latest jar file, which is currently is 2.7.3. So you just need to download the standalone jar file here. I suggest saving it in a folder called Jython because just to be a bit more organized, you'll need to know where to find that in future. There's a number of Python extensions that require access to external modules, and it makes sense to include them in that Jython folder too. So mine is in here. See the standalone jar file. I've already got the py and the requirements txt in there as well, which you'll need in a second. My folder says Mount C because I'm using WSL on Windows 11. So we go back here. So once you've got your jar file in that folder, you need to go to Burp. I'm using Community Edition here just for the demo. I actually use Burp Pro, and I think that's a great investment for when you're starting off. Once you get your first bounty, I think that's one of the first things you should look at getting is Burp Pro license. It's really useful to be able to save projects, have Burp collaborator, issues, activity, etc. So you want to go to the extensions tab, go to extensions settings, which I've already got open, and then you'll see this Python environment section. So you need to set this to the location of the jar file, and then you need to update this to the same folder that holds the jar file. Okay, so then so you need to then go and run this command inside the folder that has the jar file. I won't run it now on mine. It takes a few minutes to run, and I've already done it, so I don't need to do that. And then you want to download the gap.py file and the requirements.txt. So I've already got them in here. Then you want to install those modules. So again, you run this command within the folder that's got the jar file. And again, I've already done that. It does take a few minutes to run, so I won't do that now. So then once you've done that, hopefully you'll get no errors, everything will be great. You then need to go to back to Burp, excuse me, then you go to extensions, you need to click add here, select Python, and then just wait for that to open. I don't know why Burp does this. Sometimes when it tries to open external files, it takes a while. So you need to select your .py file. I have it in my Jython folder here just for this demo, but again, it's good to be organized. I actually have a separate folder called Burp Suite, and then in there I have a folder for any extensions to hold any config for any extensions, etc. So it's worth doing that, but I've just got it in the Jython file here. So I'll add that, click next. Just wait for that to happen. Don't know why my machine is so slow at the moment. Okay, so the extension loaded successfully. You should see this message here. Again, if you didn't install properly, you will see the warning message here about Beautiful Soup not being installed. So I'd go back and do those installation instructions again to make sure you did it right. Just check the errors tab, it should be blank. So it's worth keeping an eye on, if you do ever get any problems with GAP, if you check the errors tab, this might give you a clue of what's gone wrong. Or chances are the error is not going to make any sense, but if you go to the GitHub repo, you can raise an issue, and if you provide anything in this window, that'll make things a lot easier for me to look at. Currently, nothing else is output to this window, but there's going to be a future release of GAP next month, where if you have Community Edition, you'll want to, there'll be some extra information being output here, so keep an eye out for that update next month. So that's the installation sorted. So next we'll look at the interface itself. So we successfully installed GAP. So there should be an extra tab over here now for the GAP interface. There's a banner at the top which should click through to my GitHub page. Sometimes this banner won't display, depends on the font size and things. If there's not enough space to display this, it will remove that to be able to fit everything in. There's a help button here which displays the document I mentioned earlier on the GitHub page, so you can check that out anytime if you want a reminder of what any of these options do. And there's also a buy me a coffee button, which if you decide you like the tool or it finds you some cool bugs, you can click through and buy me a coffee. That'd be great. So one thing to clarify about GAP is it's not an active tool. It doesn't run in the background and just pre-populate the data. You have to actually select a target or request, for example, and actually send it to GAP to get the parameters, links, and words. So the idea is you open Burp, you walk the app, and then once you've got everything, then you can select what you need, send it to GAP, and get the information out. So before we look at all these options for the different modes, I just want to cover the other options, which is just the output. So you can determine whether you actually save the output to disk as well, and this specifies the directory that the files will be written to. This defaults to your personal directory, but you can obviously change that. And I would suggest changing that because if it creates, it might end up creating a lot of files as you use GAP more and more. You don't want it all just in your personal directory. I'd suggest creating, having a Burp Suite directory, then having a GAP directory in there, and then sort of GAP output, for example. So I'm using WSL on Windows. So when you choose a directory, there is no option to select a WSL folder, but you can, for example, you can do something like this. So I'm going to select a GAP output in my WSL home directory and change it to that. So I'm just going to go to that. Oops. There you go. So that's the directory we're going to be writing the files to. Nothing in there at the moment. So to show a demo of GAP, I'm going to use Red Bull, and I've set up a scope just of anything that contains Red Bull. So I just went onto the main site and just clicked around a few things, and these are the targets and the requests and responses I have. So to start off with, I'll make sure that the autosave option is on. Also, sorry, before I look at the output, I just want to cover these two options. If you do change anything and you change any options and you want that to persist the next time you open GAP, then you need to click Save Options. Otherwise, it will just go back to the defaults it has. You can also click Restore Defaults as well, to restore to what it was the first time you loaded GAP up, and then you can save again to save those default options. Okay, so we're going to click that to save the output. Then I'm going to just pick one of these and run GAP. You'll see it's got a star on it. It goes orange. It means it's successfully run. So we'll go back to our terminal. So now you can see that there's a folder which corresponds to the target that we run it for. If I look in there, there's a file with for that domain, date and timestamp, and there's a links and params folder. There isn't a words one because there were no words found in this particular case. If we look at that, look at the links, then you can see API event, that was the only link found. There you go, that's the one that was there. So if I run this again though, but select 3 targets, I'll just remove what's here at the moment. We've got nothing there. I'll run GAP. It's running. It shows how many requests within each of the 3 targets. So it's a bit slower than normal. Okay. So now if I go, so it's still right in the output. So I think, not sure why it's that slow. I think it's because I'm recording. If I look in here now, so I have a folder for each target, but I also have a file which contains a sorted list of the links from all 3 targets and the params from all 3 targets, etc. So if I look at the links, so we have all those. Really wondering why it's called temp project. Because with Community Edition, you can't actually save a project or name a project. It's just always temporary. So that's why it says temporary project up here. So when you run for more than 1 target, it actually uses the title of the Burp project to to name those files. So normally in Burp Pro, you'd have a project and it would, I'd call it Red Bull, for example. So the file that would say Red Bull up there, and the files would say Red Bull with a date timestamp. There is a way of doing that in Burp Community Edition if you really wanted to. There's an extension called Sharpener which allows you to change a number of different things, like put icons on the menus and all kind of things. One thing it does do as well is it lets you change the burp title. It's actually changed to Red Bull straight away when I opened Sharpener because it remembered settings I actually tried out when I was testing this earlier. So you can, I'll just show you again. So you can change that. So originally it starts off as temporary project, but I changed it to Red Bull before. But now that's Red Bull, if I run GAP again, again, it normally isn't this slow. Okay, when it says processing, it means it's writing out the files. Yeah, it found a lot of words in it. Okay, so if I now look in there, so the next time I run it, it's still put the specific files in, sorry, in the directory for the target. So now there are two lots of different timestamps, but also you can see that it actually has used Red Bull to create the files for all of the targets put together. So now we've gone through that, I think it's time to go through the different modes of GAP. So GAP has three different modes: parameters, links, and words, and you can select any combination of these modes to run GAP for. But bear in mind, if you select parameters, then run GAP, you can't then select links after you run GAP and expect to see a list of links. It will only run for the options that are selected at the time it runs. Also, if you decide that you don't care about words, for example, then unselect that before you run it because it will make the whole process a lot quicker. So we're going to start off just going through the parameter options. So I'm just going to run GAP on some targets just to get an initial list. Okay, so we've got a list of potential parameters. That's something I want to point out as well. GAP gives you potential parameters and potential links because they're not necessarily going to be actual parameters. It will give you things that are definitely parameters, but will also return things that it thinks could be parameters from requests and responses, just so you can use them in fuzzing. For example, we'll get to these options later, but the name attribute of meta tags, it doesn't mean that that is actually going to be a parameter, but it's worth testing because it could be. Okay, so the first thing I want to show is this show origin button here. If you click that, it will actually show the origin URL that each potential parameter was found on. So in this case, this same one was found on a number of different URLs. This one, so you can see it just says GAP and it isn't actually a URL. These come from this option here. So it basically just adds a list of common parameter names to your parameter list to use for fuzzing. It's something that I put in initially a long time ago. I don't think it's actually that useful. In the next version of GAP, this is going to be removed, to be honest, and replaced with something that's a lot more useful. So but just bear in mind that's what that means at the moment. So if we untick that and run it again, you'll see that's gone now. So it's just the parameters we found. Also notice because show origin was ticked when we ran GAP, then automatically shows these straight away. And you can just toggle in between these. One other thing to note as well, if you have show origin ticked, if the outputs that's written to disk, if you wanted to see this, then make sure you tick this and you can save options. So when she'll run this again, so we'll look at the output files. So you can see that the origin URL is actually displayed in the output as well. And it's always with a space and then within square brackets. Okay. So the next options. So also under here is an option to show all these parameters, but show them as a query string. And it uses this value with a numerical, an incremental integer appended to this value. So the idea of this originally was you can copy and paste this, tag it onto the end of a URL, and then you can search to see if any of these values, well, you can just search for XNLV example, and then if you see XNLV 17, then you'll know that the PID parameter value was in the response, reflected in the response. This was actually something that I took away from GAP for a while, but a few people, because I didn't actually think many people used it, but a few people asked if they could put it back. So I sort of tagged it under here rather than being an option up here. Obviously, there's limited use to this because if the parameter list is huge, then this query list will be massive and it will actually probably be too long for the URL and fail. But obviously, if you just have a smaller list, it could be useful. So let's go back to that. So let's have a look. So in the include URL pathwords, this basically will include anything. Well, if I run this, so I'll run this first without that option. So we've got 39 potential parameters here. I'll include this, run it again. Now we've got 287. So you can see there's a lot of other things in here now. And what these are, for example, it are sections of the path. So you'll have v3 API GraphQL, etc. in here. So API GraphQL. So basically, it's path words in between forward slashes. That could, again, there could be some interesting words in there that could potentially be parameters that you might want to fuzz with. Okay, so then we have request parameters and response parameters. So the request parameters are basically all of these options will put in parameters in the list that Burp itself flags as a parameter. So this is done through the API. If we click the help here, so it's using the Burp Extender API, and is the IE parameter interface. This is the legacy API, not the new Montoya API, so I'm not sure if that's changed in that. But so this gives a number of things that Burp actually recognizes. So query string parameters, message body parameters, parameter attributes in multi-part message bodies. So that's the value of parameter attribute within a multi-part message body, such as the name of an uploaded file, JSON parameters, cookie names, which could potentially be a parameter, items of data in XML structure, value of tags in XML structure. So you can select any of these and it will bring in what Burp believes to be a parameter. So for example, if I look at this request here, in the inspector, request query parameters has got ID, and that is why ID is included in this list, because that option is selected. So you can select any of these options. Then we have response parameters. So this is what GAP tries to find within the responses, rather than what Burp thinks to be a parameter. So let's have a look. Response parameters. So there's JSON parameters. So if the response is a MIME type of JSON, then the key names will be retrieved if this option is selected. There's value of tag attributes in XML structure. So if the response is a MIME type of XML, then the XML attributes will retrieved. The name and ID attributes of HTML input fields. If the response is a MIME type of HTML, then the value of the name and ID attributes of any input tags are retrieved. JavaScript variables and constants. JavaScript variables set with var, let, or const are retrieved. There's a note here that improvements can definitely be made on this. So that's something that may be done in future to try and identify more potential parameters. Then there's name attributes of meta tags. So if the response is a MIME type of HTML, then the name attribute of any meta tags are retrieved. And the last one is parameters from links found, and that option is only enabled if the links mode is also used. So any URL query parameters in potential links will be then put into the parameter list, but only if they're clearly in scope, or if there is just a path and no way determining if it is in scope. So we'll get to what that means later when we look at links mode. So just as a demo, I'm just going to untick all of these parameter options and run GAP. So without any of these checked, these are a list of parameters that GAP itself has identified as potential parameters by looking through the responses. So if I enable, just to demonstrate the parameters from links found, if I enable links as well and enable the parameters from links found is the only option. So before we had 27 potential parameters. If I now run this, we've got 28. So there's only one extra one that wasn't already in the list that was found from some of these links that were found here. Okay, so that is it for the parameters section, and we'll look at links next. Okay, so for links mode, this gets a list of potential links. Not all of them may be valid. So this GAP uses a complex regex that was initially based on Gerben Javado's link finder regex, but it's been improved a lot to try and find a lot of different kind of variations of how things are shown in responses. It doesn't find everything because there are so many variations that can be seen in all different types of responses like XML, JSON, JavaScript, etc. So there's always changes we can make to try and pick up more. So if you ever do see something that GAP hasn't picked up, or you think that should have been in there, then please raise a GitHub issue with an example, so then I can try and improve it for everyone else then as well. So when you run links mode, there are full links that can be found. Either have a schema, HTTP, HTTPS, even WSS, or it might just start with 2 forward slashes. But also it will actually just show file names or just paths as well. So again, along with the same as parameters, sorry, there's a show origin endpoint. If you click that, for example, this particular endpoint was found in all these links. There is also an in scope only. So if I can tick that, so there are potential 221, but there are only 213 in scope. Now, this didn't change because all of these, there's no way of telling if a path is in scope or out of scope. So when you select in scope, those stay there. But if we look down here, so my scope settings are basically just anything with Red Bull in at the moment. So without this on, you can see that there's Wingfinder, wingsforlife.com. If I put in scope only, it uses burp scope to work out which ones to display. Okay, so now with these paths, they may be more useful if you actually prefix it. So there's a few different options we got here. You can prefix with the selected targets, and what this option does is, if I just select this one, for example, I got it in. I just select. So in this one, there's only one one link that was found. Okay, yeah. So there's only one link that was found, which was API event, and we've asked to prefix it with the target we selected on. Okay. And then if I select all 3 of these and run GAP, then it will, for every path it found, it will prefix with each of these 3 in there. So you get a lot more links. So for example, so this path was prefixed with redbull.com, pm.redbull.com, qm.redbull.com, because that's the ones in the target you selected. If you don't want to do that, you can say prefix with specific links. So you can just say, I want everything just to be prefixed with, I'm going to find all the links in here, but I only want to prefix it with redbull.com. If you don't specify schema, it will automatically put HTTP in front of it. So you can see that it's just put redbull.com in front of all of them that don't have a domain already. You can actually supply more in here as well. So, redbull.co.uk, for example, if I run that again, you can see redbull.com prefix and all those, and then again you can see redbull red null. So I spelled that wrong, but there you go. You can see that it's used that domain to prefix them as well. So there's also an option here to also include the unprefixed link. So pretty straightforward. It means it's going to prefix, in this example, a prefix for the select targets, but will also include the original paths in there as well if you wanted that in your list. So it still has the prefix, all the prefix ones in here as well, but included just the path. So this option includes sitemap endpoints in the linked list. It's basically includes the links of the requests in Burp in the target you selected. So back to the first example, if I just run it without that, that is a link that it found in the responses, a potential link. If I select that and run it, then it includes these two in there as well, which are the only two request URLs for that target selected. I shall just run this again. So one more thing, then we have filters. So I can say I only want to see, say, everything with that in. And you can clear filter again. You can say I only want to see everything that doesn't have that in. Excuse my computer talking to me. It's got various, it talks every now and again using eSpeak. Just says some random things. I always forget that I actually put it in there. So you can also do case sensitive. So if I say I only want that, whoops, that it still finds it. But if I do case sensitive, oops, then there are none found because it's a lowercase, not uppercase. The last thing are link extensions. So if I just clear that filter a minute. So link extensions, if the option is selected, it will be applied when GAP is run. And the text field contains a comma separated list of values. And if any of these values exist in a potential link found, then it will be excluded from the final list. There's an initial default that's determined by a default exclusions constant in the Python file, but you can change this and save your settings at any time. So, for example, if not that it's a useful example, but if I said exclude anything that has red ball in it, and then run GAP again, you can see that everything that had the word red ball has now been excluded. If you do, just don't forget to if you add anything useful, not just red ball, any file extensions, for example, you think I really don't want those in there, then when you do change this, remember to save options, and again when you close Burp and open it again, that list will have persisted. If you disable this, then all links will be returned and this list won't be applied at all. Okay. So I think that's everything for links mode. So our last mode is word mode, and this option generates a target specific word list from the responses that search what you pass to GAP. So I'm just going to run it based on these for now. Just going through each separate request response within each of the 3 targets were selected. It is normally a bit faster than this. I think my machine's going slower because I've got OBS running to record this video. So hopefully it shouldn't be that slow for you. So with word mode, you've got various options. So include words with digits. Obviously, that makes should be clear that if you have that tick, then any words it did pick up that have numbers in it will be included. Otherwise, they won't. Can't find any examples in here that do actually from these particular responses. But Then you've got create singular / plural words. So in this case, if the word Mexico was found, it doesn't always do a great job. It does the best possible for adding plurals. So see if we can find it. So medias. Sorry, it'll also do the other way around. So if it finds a plural, it will try and give you the singular version of it. So it's not it doesn't just add an S to the end, which other tools seem to do. It does try and be a bit more intelligent with various types of plurals. So Kilimanjaro and Kilimanjaros, I know in this case it's not, that doesn't make sense, but with particular words that end in O, then it's OES. And let's find an example that ends in a Y. So again, I'm not sure what cloudinary is, but then that gives us a plural of cloudinaries. So it's not perfect, but it's a lot more than a lot of wordless tools seem to do, and it could be useful when you use this word list of fuzz and you've got a proper plural or singular version of another word you found somewhere. So then we've got include HTML comments. So if that is checked, then all words within HTML comments will be considered to be put in the word list as well. And then include image alt attribute. So if that's checked, then all words with the alt image of image tags in the HTML will be considered. So if you've got an image and the alt is the name of a product or something, which shows, normally when you hover over an image, you see the alt tag pop up. So those words will be included again if you click that. Include path words. So again, that's similar to the parameter one, where if I add that, you will see words such as API, GraphQL, because they were in the paths of the requests that will run against GAP. So doing this, obviously these are words that were in the path, and because we've got include words with digits in there, they appear. So if I turn that off, run it again, then you'll see all the ones that did have digits, numerical digits in there, they've all disappeared from the list. The last one is the maximum length of words. So default's quite high. If you decide you only want to see words that are no longer than 5, so that's 5. And notice that it does exclude plurals. So if it does find a 5-letter word, so like April, it will try and do a plural of that, which obviously is then 6 letters, but you don't want to miss out on the plural words. So in addition to these options, words will be taken from all responses if they have certain conditions. So only responses with certain context types are searched. And the defaults are text HTML, application XML, application JSON, text plain, application XHTML plus XML, application LD plus JSON, and text XML. If there are any other content types you think should be in that list, then please let me know. GAP will also put words that are from meta tags where the property is OG title or OG description, or the name is description, keywords, Twitter title, or Twitter description. And it will also include words from the rest of inner HTML page, excluding style, script, and link tags. Also, if the original word has any uppercase characters, a lowercase version will also be added to this list. One more thing as well here, we got our stop words. Stop words is a term that comes from natural language processing, where there are common words that will be excluded from content. So if a word exists in this list before you run GAP, then it will be excluded from this input. I think that's everything for words mode. So that was pretty much everything for the 3 different modes and most of GAP functionality. Just want to cover a few extra little things. I've just put some more traffic in here just to show something to you. So if I run GAP, when you go to GAP, you'll see it running here, but you can cancel that at any time. So so you don't have to wait for it. If it's a particularly large project, it can take a while, and you might decide you want to stop it or change what you run it for. Also, if it is running and then you run it again, it will automatically cancel and restart with the new settings if you wanted to do that. Also, be aware that you can run GAP from any context. So, you know, if I wanted to go to repeater, I can call GAP for that, just that one request, for example. So also to let you know, there's a big update coming to GAP quite soon, hopefully next month. So that's something to look out for. Also, if you do like the extension, then please star it on my GitHub repo. If you want to know when the new release is out, then what you can do with this, I suggest doing it with any tools you use a lot to know when new versions are out, new features are there, etc. If you go to the watch thing here, you can select custom and releases, and then you'll be sent an email when a new version is released. So I think I've covered everything in the extension. If I wasn't clear on anything, if I missed something out, then please comment and I'll try and address that. I hope you like the tool. I hope it finds you some nice bugs. And if it does, please consider buying me a coffee on the link on the extension. So thanks for your time, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.